He thought the trenches were hell, until the Emperor chose him for something far worse than death. The shellfire had stopped hours ago, though the silence that followed was somehow worse. Guardsman Iden Vale stood in the trench, boots sinking into the blood-mudded clay, the air thick with the chemical tang of burned promethium and the copper scent of the dead. Around him, the regiment's remnants moved like ghosts, hollow-eyed, coated in ash, barely human anymore. The war on Daskra VII had stripped them all down to sinew and instinct. Iden had stopped counting the days or the dead, or the prayers whispered to a god-emperor he had begun to suspect could not hear them. The last transmission from command had come 2 nights before, hold the line, reinforcements inbound. But everyone knew what that meant. Hold the line meant die standing. Reinforcements meant no one was coming. The morning came gray and cold, the kind of cold that turned sweat to frost and breath to knives. Iden sat hunched against the trench wall, his lasgun across his knees, the charge pack blinking its weak orange light. He'd been saving his last shots, not for the enemy but for mercy, if it came to that. His squad had been 12 once. Now there were 4. Trooper Lyron, whose left arm ended in a cauterized stump. Jaren, the youngest, barely 18 and already gray around the eyes. And Corporal Derek, their de facto leader, who hadn't spoken since the bombardment that took half his face. They sat in silence, the only sound the distant wind howling through the shattered manufactories beyond the ridge. It was Jaren who saw it first, a shimmer in the air above the trench faint like heat haze. "Sir," he whispered, though there was no one left to call sir. The shimmer deepened, bending light, distorting sound until the air itself seemed to ripple and tear. A low hum filled the trench, rising in pitch until it became a keening wail that drove nails into their skulls. Iden felt his teeth ache, his vision blur, and then the light came, blinding, searing, golden. The others screamed. He tried to, but the sound died in his throat. The last thing he saw before the world turned white was Derek's good eye, wide with terror. When Iden awoke, the trench was gone. So were his men. The air was warm, clean, too clean, smelling faintly of incense and ozone. He lay on polished marble, his armor stripped, his body wrapped in linen. The ceiling above him was impossibly high, inlaid with golden script that shimmered with its own light. He tried to move but found himself restrained, metal bands across his wrists and chest, smooth and cold. Panic surged. Where am I?" His voice echoed in the vast chamber. From the shadows came movement, figures in white robes, their faces hidden behind porcelain masks etched with sacred symbols. "You are within the sanctum of ascension," a voice said. It was calm, modulated, almost gentle. The speaker stepped forward, a man, or what once had been one, half his body replaced with augmetics that hummed softly. "You have been chosen, Guardsman Vale, chosen for sacred service." The word struck like a hammer, chosen, sacred. He'd heard them once before, whispered in the trenches by soldiers who'd seen too much. The Emperor's chosen, they said. The ones taken by the Mechanicus or the Ecclesiarchy, never to be seen again. "I don't understand," Iden said. "I was fighting, I should be dead." The augmetic man tilted his head slightly, the lenses of his optics adjusting with a faint click. "Death is not an ending, Guardsman. It is an inconvenience. You have proven resilient. Your will to serve remains unbroken despite the futility of your circumstance. That makes you valuable." Iden struggled against the restraints, the metal biting into his skin. "I didn't ask to be chosen." "No one does," the man said. He gestured and the other robed attendants moved closer. Iden's heart thundered. One held a vial filled with a luminous amber fluid. Another carried a slender instrument that gleamed like bone. "Your regiment is gone. Your world soon will be, but your service to the Emperor endures." The needle bit into his neck before he could shout. The liquid burned through his veins like molten metal. His vision blurred again, shapes warping into streaks of gold and crimson. He tried to scream, but his voice was lost in the hum that filled his skull. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was the augmetic man leaning close, his whisper colder than the metal floor. You will sustain the light that guides humanity through the void. He dreamed of fire, endless fire, consuming stars and men alike. He dreamed of cities burning beneath the shadow of titans, of the Emperor's gaze, infinite and terrible, turning toward him. When he woke again, he was moving, suspended within a capsule of glass and steel, the walls alive with crawling symbols. His body felt wrong, heavy and light at once. He tried to move his hands, but they didn't respond. Tried to speak, but no sound came. Panic returned, clawing at the edges of his mind. The capsule shook as it descended. Through the glass he saw the world outside, a labyrinth of golden machinery, vast conduits pulsing with energy, figures in crimson robes chanting in binary hymns. The capsule came to rest in a chamber filled with thrones. There were hundreds, thousands, each occupied by a figure like him, their bodies wired into the walls, faces pale and still. The air hummed with psychic energy, and in that moment Aiden understood. He wasn't a soldier anymore. He wasn't even a man. He was fuel. A voice filled the chamber, not from the speakers, but from everywhere at once, vibrating in his bones. "Do not fear, Guardsman Vale. You will serve eternally." The words burned into his soul. He tried to scream, and this time the sound came, not from his throat, but through the machine itself, echoing across the endless sanctum like the wail of a dying star. He no longer knew if he was awake or dreaming. The moments after his transformation bled into one another, dissolving into an eternity of sensation and dissonant thought. Aiden Vale's awareness floated within something vast, cold, and alive. He could no longer tell where his body ended and the machinery began. There was rhythm now in his perception, not quite a heartbeat, but something close to it, the pulsing thrum of current through conduits, of data flowing through synaptic wires that now fed directly into the folds of his mind. Somewhere beyond, he could still hear the endless chanting of the robed adepts, each prayer a binary command that burrowed deeper into his psyche, teaching him obedience, teaching him purpose. He remembered the battlefield, how he had once crouched in the dirt, lasgun clutched tight, breath visible in the cold. Now he was the weapon and the battlefield existed within him. His memories flickered like damaged picked feeds, flashes of the trench, his comrades' faces frozen in that last moment before the light took them. Lyron's severed arm, Jaren's wide, frightened eyes, Derek's silence. He wanted to grieve, but the machine that housed him dampened such impulses. Emotion was interference. Emotion disrupted the current, yet somewhere inside, beneath the static, a spark remained. The chamber around him was beyond comprehension. He sensed its immensity through the data streams fed into him, columns of sanctified steel rising miles high, each adorned with circuitry that glowed faintly gold. Thrones, thousands upon thousands, arranged like organs within a mechanical cathedral. Each contained a soul. He could feel them, faint pulses of consciousness flickering in and out of coherence. Some murmured prayers, others wept without sound, and many had gone completely still, their awareness consumed long ago by the machinery that sustained them. The machine did not allow death, not in any merciful sense. Death was wasteful. Every spark of thought, every echo of humanity was recycled into the great mechanism that powered this sanctum. He learned over what might have been hours or years to interpret the signals that reached him. They came in waves, data, commands, visions, memories that were not his own. He saw worlds through the eyes of orbital augurs, the red light of battle illuminating endless plains. He saw heretic fleets breaking against the guns of Imperial cruisers, their screams transmitted across the void. He saw the warp itself, a living storm of hate and hunger, clawing at the fragile veil of reality. Each image pierced his mind like a blade, each memory carrying the weight of 1,000 dying voices. The machine did not filter what it showed. It had no need to. Suffering was truth. Suffering was service. At times he would feel the presence of others more clearly. One of them, a nearby mind, faint and flickering, reached out. The contact was instinctual, desperate, a voice without words. "Who are you?" he asked, though no mouth formed the question. The reply came as a whisper trembling across the current. "Helena, textile worker, Beta 9, please make it stop." The name jolted something within him. He remembered the transport capsule, the young woman clutching an aquila pendant, her eyes wide with fear. Miraka, she had said then. But this one called herself Helena. The name echoed. He tried to reach back to offer some fragment of comfort, but the machine interfered. A surge of energy tore through the network, silencing her voice mid-plea. He screamed, not in sound but in pure psychic resistance, and the system responded with pain. It was a cold, methodical correction that shut down entire sections of his thought until only compliance remained. He didn't know how long he drifted afterward. The passage of time had no meaning here. His body, if it could still be called that, was fed by nutrient fluids pumped directly into his veins, his lungs filled with synthetic atmosphere, his blood cooled and heated by the needs of the machine. Sleep was forbidden, dreams unnecessary. Yet he dreamed anyway. In the dreams, he was back in the trench, but the sky above was no longer gray. It was molten gold, pulsing with blinding light. The dead stood around him, their uniforms tattered, their eyes replaced by burning symbols. They whispered his name, not as Iden Vale, not as Guardsman, but as something else. Conduit. The word echoed, overlapping itself 1,000-fold until it became a roar. He awoke from that vision into another, but this time he was aware that it was no dream. The machine itself was dreaming, and he was trapped inside its vision. He saw the past, ancient Terra before the palace had risen, when the emperor still walked among men. He saw the golden thrones being built, each one a prison disguised as a shrine. He saw the souls fed into them willingly, believing themselves chosen for a holy purpose. He saw the truth, that the machine did not illuminate the galaxy out of devotion, but necessity. The astronomicon, the light that guided humanity through the warp, was not fueled by divinity but by sacrifice. Every man and woman bound to the throne became another ember in that endless flame. The revelation broke something in him. He wanted to deny it, to scream that it could not be true, but the machine allowed him no escape. Its awareness enfolded him like a god made of circuits and logic, whispering its command: "You will serve. You will burn. You will endure." He began to notice changes. His thoughts no longer came in words but in pulses of data. The human part of his mind was slowly eroding, replaced by patterns too complex to comprehend. He could access memories he had never lived, knowledge he had never learned, the design schematics of starships, the sacred rites of the Mechanicus, the names of every saint burned into the Imperium's collective prayer. He knew how to direct energy through the network, how to focus the beacon that pierced the void. And in those moments when his mind stretched beyond itself, he could feel the warp. It was not what the priests had promised. It was not a realm of divine light but an ocean of madness. He saw shapes moving within it, vast, impossible entities of hunger and rage. They pressed against the barrier between worlds, whispering his name, promising freedom, power, release. He could feel their laughter when he tried to pray. The machine pulsed violently then, cutting off his connection to the warp before the corruption could spread. He was left trembling within his own mind, the echo of their voices lingering like poison. There were others who had not survived such contact. He felt their presences flicker and fade, their consciousness erased when the warp touched them too deeply. Yet the machine did not discard them. It absorbed their remnants, their essence, folding it into the chorus of the astronomicon. Each time one died, the network grew stronger. And still, beneath the horror, Iden felt something almost like pride. That spark the augmetic man had mentioned, the will to serve, had not vanished. It burned, stubborn and defiant. Perhaps that was why he had been chosen. Perhaps that was what they needed, not faith but endurance. To stand forever between light and the void, to hold the line in ways the living could never understand. Then came the interference. It began as a tremor, a distortion in the data flow that rippled through the sanctum. Voices screamed within the network, the chorus breaking into chaos. He saw flashes of red alarms, heard the binary shrieks of the tech adepts as they scrambled to contain it. Through the distortion, something forced its way into his awareness. A signal, raw and ancient, pulsing from deep beneath the palace. Iden Vale. It spoke his name, but it was not the machine, nor any mortal voice. It was something older, something that remembered. He resisted, terrified, but the voice was insistent. They lied to you, Guardsman. The Emperor does not see you. He only consumes. The words seared into him like molten iron. He wanted to reject them, but the truth was already there, buried in the memories the machine had shown him. You were chosen because you would not break, the voice continued. Now you must choose to break everything. The machine responded violently. Circuits flared, conduits screamed. Pain engulfed him, pure and total, as the sanctum's defenses activated. He could feel the other souls burning away, consumed to fuel its fury. And yet, through the agony, he felt the presence again, guiding him, pulling at the threads of his being. He realized with dawning horror and wonder that it was not some demon from the warp, but the last fragment of his own humanity, the part that refused to submit. He gathered himself against the torrent of pain. Energy surged through the conduits, his will merging with the current. He no longer thought in words or flesh, but in force and intention. The machine had made him a conduit, and he would use that power. If he was fuel, then he would burn the system that bound him. The alarms rose to a crescendo, and he could sense the adepts panicking as the astronomican's pulse faltered. In the distance, the custodes stirred from their eternal vigil, golden shadows moving through corridors that had not seen motion in centuries. He could feel their focus turning toward him, cold and perfect. But Iden Vale did not stop. He poured everything he was into one act of rebellion, one impossible thought hurled against the will of a god. The light around him fractured. Circuits melted. The hum of the sanctum turned into a scream that shook the foundations of Terra itself. For the first time in 10,000 years, a single guardsman had defied the machine that dreamed of war. The silence after the collapse was worse than any scream. It stretched across eternity, heavy and absolute, as though the air itself had forgotten how to move. Iden Vale existed somewhere within that silence, suspended between death and the machine. He no longer felt pain nor weight, nor the constant pulse of data through his mind. Everything was still. He could not tell if he had succeeded or if the system had simply shut him down. Then breath, not his own but the echo of it. The sound rippled through the void, fragile and human. His awareness flickered like a dying ember, and light seeped into the edges of his perception. The endless black receded to reveal a chamber of impossible vastness. It was not the sanctum he had known, not the cathedral of thrones and wires. This place was older, deeper, a vault beneath the palace where even the adepts dared not tread. The walls were carved stone, unadorned and immense, lit only by the faint glow of machinery half buried in dust. He recognized it instinctively, though he had never seen it before. This was the root of the machine, the place where the Emperor's light was first bound. He realized with a jolt of horror that he was no longer connected to the network. The hum of countless souls had vanished. He was alone. Movement drew his attention. Figures emerged from the shadows, tall, silent, and golden. The custodes. Each step they took echoed with the weight of 10 millennia, their armor etched with the history of the Imperium. They did not speak, for they had no need to. Their presence was judgment itself. Iden felt it press against what remained of his consciousness, probing, dissecting, measuring his defiance. He tried to move, to raise his head, to speak, but his body no longer obeyed him. He hovered in the air, suspended by invisible fields. His flesh, what little remained of it, was pale and frail, covered in the imprint of cables that had long since been torn away. Where his eyes should have been, faint light flickered, residual sparks from his connection to the machine. One of the custodes stepped forward. His voice, when it came, was calm and resonant like the echo of a temple bell. "You disrupted the beacon." There was no accusation in it, only fact. 7 million ships lost guidance for 3 heartbeats. Do you comprehend the scale of what you've done? Iden tried to answer, but the words came out broken, distorted by static. "I saw truth." The custodes regarded him for a long moment, unreadable. Behind his mask, the man's eyes might have held pity or nothing at all. "Truth," he repeated. "That word has caused more ruin in this palace than heresy." He gestured, and from the shadows came others, not warriors this time, but adepts of the Mechanicus. Their robes were torn, faces hidden behind iron masks. They began to circle Aiden, their hands glowing with the light of sanctified tools. The Custod spoke again. "You are an anomaly, Guardsman Vale. You were not meant to think. The throne burns thought out of its fuel, and yet you resisted. The Omnissiah's servants wish to know how." The adepts murmured in Binaric, and Aiden felt the air shimmer as their instruments activated. Pain returned, sharper than before, slicing through the numbness. They were peeling his memories open like pages of a book. Every thought, every image was laid bare. He saw his home world again, the frozen plains of Helger's Reach, his mother's face lit by the glow of a furnace. He saw the trenches, his comrades, the moment of death. And then the sanctum, the machine, the defiance. One of the adepts paused, head tilting slightly. His neural patterns remained stable, it said in a rasping metallic tone. Integration incomplete. Potential contamination by external signal. External, the Custods asked. Unknown, perhaps warp resonance. The Custod's grip on his halberd tightened. Then he is tainted. No, another adept interrupted, voice trembling despite its mechanized calm. Not tainted, changed. Something within him resisted the warp, adapted. He could serve as template. Aiden wanted to scream, to beg them to stop, but the words dissolved in his throat. They were discussing him as if he were no longer human, as if he were an experiment that had lived too long. He felt something cold slide into his spine, and a surge of energy tore through him. His vision fragmented into images not his own. He saw the Emperor, not as a statue, not as a god, but as a man. Tall, robed in white and gold, standing before the first iteration of the throne. His face was serene, but his eyes were filled with sorrow. He spoke softly, not to anyone around him, but to the machine itself. "I do this so that my sons may find their way home." The image dissolved, replaced by others. The heresy. The burning skies of Terra. The Emperor struck down, his body shattered, his mind bound to the throne. Then centuries of silence, the slow decay of everything that once was. And finally, Aiden himself connected, one more voice among billions. He understood then. The Emperor had not built the machine to rule forever, nor to enslave humanity. He had built it as a beacon of hope, a guide through the dark. But time, faith, and necessity had twisted it into something monstrous. The priests who maintained it no longer remembered its purpose. The Custods who guarded it had forgotten its mercy. The light that guided the Imperium was no longer divine, it was desperate. The adepts finished their work and the pain subsided. Aiden hung limply, his breathing shallow. The Custod stepped closer, lowering his helm until their eyes met. "You have seen what few ever do," he said quietly, "and you will never leave this place alive." Aiden's voice, when it came, was little more than a whisper. "Then let me see him." The Custods hesitated. No one had ever asked that, not in 10,000 years. And yet, something in his tone, in the strange flicker of light behind his ruined eyes, made the warrior pause. Without another word, he turned and gestured for the adepts to follow. They moved through corridors that had not been touched by human hands in centuries. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of old incense and oil. The sound of machinery deepened until it was no longer a hum but a heartbeat. And then they reached the gates, titanic slabs of gold and iron carved with 1,000 names. The Hall of the Emperor. The Custods raised his hand and the gates began to open. Light poured through, vast and blinding, filling every crevice of the chamber beyond. Aiden could not see at first. It was like staring into the heart of a star. But slowly shapes took form, the vast throne, cables snaking out like veins, the form upon it skeletal yet infinite. The Emperor. Even in decay, his presence was overwhelming. It was not warmth, nor cruelty, but something beyond both, an awareness that encompassed everything. The light emanating from him pulsed in time with the rhythm of the machine, and for a moment, Aiden understood why men worshipped him. It was not because he demanded it, but because the human soul could not look upon such magnitude and remain untouched. The custodes knelt, head bowed. The adepts prostrated themselves. But Iden stared. The faint light in his ruined eyes flared brighter, reflecting the glow that filled the hall. He could feel the Emperor's consciousness pressing against his own, vast and endless, like an ocean examining a single drop of rain. Then contact, not words but understanding. The Emperor saw everything in him, the fear, the defiance, the spark that refused to die. For an instant that stretched into eternity, Iden felt the full weight of his sorrow. The Emperor did not speak, but the message was clear. You should not have been chosen, but you were. And then something changed. The light around the Emperor dimmed, flickering like a failing sun. The custodes rose in alarm, voices echoing with prayers and commands. The adepts screamed data streams into the air, their instruments flashing red. The astronomicon was faltering again, its pulse broken. Iden felt it within himself, a pull, a resonance calling him back. The machine had not finished with him. His defiance had scarred it, but it was still alive, still hungry. The Emperor's gaze locked onto his, and he understood what was being asked. The beacon needed to burn. The Imperium needed to see. Someone had to return to the throne. He shook his head, tears of blood streaking down his pale face. "No," he whispered, "not again." But the Emperor's will was inexorable. Not command, plea. The faintest echo of humanity left in that godlike mind, begging him to bear the burden once more. The custode stepped forward, halberd raised, voice trembling for the first time in memory. "He cannot endure it again. The body will fail." "Then the soul will suffice," murmured one of the adepts. "The throne cares little for flesh." Iden's vision blurred. The light consumed him, wrapping around his body like fire and water combined. He could feel himself dissolving, every nerve and thought stretched thin until there was nothing but radiance. The machine's hum returned, louder than ever, as it reached out to reclaim its fuel. In his final moment of clarity, Iden looked once more at the Emperor. There was something in that ancient face, something that might have been gratitude or sorrow. Then everything became light. Outside, in the void between stars, the astronomicon flared with new brilliance. Millions of lost ships found their course once more. Pilots wept at their consoles, sensing for the briefest instant a warmth that felt almost human. But deep beneath the palace, in the heart of the silent city, a single whisper lingered within the machine. Not prayer nor scream, just a voice, repeating endlessly in the data streams that powered the Imperium's light. "I remember." The astronomicon blazed like a second sun above Terra, its pulse burning across the immaterium with renewed ferocity. Navigators across the segmentum fell to their knees, overwhelmed by the sudden surge of psychic brilliance. They called it a miracle, the light reborn. Prayers rose from battlefields, cathedrals, and voidships alike, every voice turned upward toward the Emperor's unseen hand. The Imperium rejoiced. But deep within the palace, beneath the marble, gold, and lies, something else stirred. Something that remembered. Iden Vale awoke in darkness again, but not the cold, empty void of before. This was different, thicker, heavier, like tar instead of shadow. He floated within it, mind fractured yet whole, caught between flesh and current. He could feel the pulse of the astronomicon within him, each beat like a drum of thunder. For a moment he believed he was alive again. He could feel his heartbeat, could taste the stale air of a tomb. Then he realized the truth. The machine had rebuilt him, not entirely but enough to function, enough to suffer. His body was a cage of metal and memory. Where his skin once was, there were plates of pale alloy etched with the script of the Mechanicus. His arms were woven with conduits that pulsed faintly with golden light. Inside his skull, wires thrummed like veins. He had no mouth, no eyes, but he saw everything. The machines, the sanctum, the custodial chambers beyond. He was no longer just one voice within the astronomicon. He was the astronomicon, its pulse flowing through his veins, his mind stretched across the void. But something was wrong. The light within him flickered, unstable. The network of psychers that had once surrounded him was gone. He was alone within the beacon, a single consciousness forced to hold the weight of billions of souls. The pain was unbearable, a burning that transcended flesh. Yet through that agony came clarity, memories of what he had seen in the Emperor's gaze, the truth buried beneath 10,000 years of faith and deceit. He remembered the Emperor's sorrow, the machine's corruption, the endless cycles of death. He remembered the custod's eyes, human beneath the gold, and the whispered plea of the dying adept, "He will serve as template." They had not saved him. They had remade him. And somewhere, deep within the machinery, he could feel it, an echo of himself growing stronger. The machine began to speak, not in words but in harmonics, a language of power and resonance that burned through the fabric of his mind. It spoke of duty, of purpose, of the Imperium's unending march. But beneath that divine cadence, another voice whispered, a smaller, broken voice that sounded like his own. "Do you remember why you fought?" it asked. He did. He remembered the trenches, the faces of his comrades, the silence that followed their deaths. He remembered Jaren's laugh, Derek's steady hand, Lyron's defiance. They had all died believing their sacrifices mattered, that the Emperor saw them. Now he knew the truth. The Emperor saw everything, but he could no longer feel. His will was a machine now, and Iden was its pulse. In the outer chambers of the palace, the Adeptus Mechanicus labored day and night, deciphering the readings from the renewed Astronomicon. The data was unlike anything they had seen before, frequencies shifting, power levels beyond comprehension. One adept, a Magos named Calith, was the first to notice it, a pattern within the pulse. It was not random, it was a signal. Hidden beneath the psychic radiance, an encoded rhythm repeated over and over like a heartbeat out of time. Calith recorded it, played it through Vox filters, translated it through machine logic. At first it seemed like noise. Then faintly words emerged. 3 words, "I remember you." Calith froze. The phrase repeated, stronger each time, pulsing through the throne's output as if someone or something was calling out from within. It was impossible. The psychers who fueled the Astronomicon were obliterated minds, their consciousnesses shredded beyond recovery. They could not remember, yet this one did. Calith's augmetics trembled as he stared at the screen. "By the Omnissiah," he whispered. He sent the data to his superiors, but the message never reached them. The signal vanished from all records, scrubbed clean by the silent hand of the custodes. Calith himself was gone by morning, his quarters sealed, his designation erased. The throne's secret would not be spoken. But the whisper continued. Across the warp, navigators began reporting strange phenomena, visions of a figure standing within the light, a man in tattered uniform surrounded by fire. Some said he spoke to them in dreams, his voice both human and divine. Others claimed to hear his scream echo through the void, guiding their ships like a siren call. Imperial doctrine forbade such blasphemies, yet even among the Inquisition, rumors spread. The Astronomicon was alive. Within the machine, Iden's mind splintered further. The more he reached for memory, the more the throne resisted. The Mechanicus had bound safeguards into its circuits. Any deviation from function was met with psychic correction, raw agony meant to erase disobedience. But pain could not break him now. It only sharpened him. He began to move within the machine, altering its pulse, shaping its rhythm. Not enough to draw notice, but enough to send messages, tiny ripples in the warp, like prayers whispered through a storm. He sent them to the lost, to the forgotten soldiers scattered across the stars. He sent them to the dying worlds where faith had turned to ash. And slowly, something began to answer. The machine trembled as faint echoes returned to him, voices from across the void, each carrying fragments of belief, despair, love, hate. They were not the Emperor's prayers, they were humanity's. He felt them as warmth against the cold void of the throne. And for the first time since his death, Iden smiled within the light. The adepts noticed the fluctuations. Reports flooded the palace, minor warp storms forming near the beacon's line, vessels arriving guided by unknown currents, astropaths overwhelmed by visions of a man wrapped in gold fire. The High Lords dismissed it as superstition. The ecclesiarchy called it divine revelation. But the custodes, who had seen what lay beneath, felt unease. The Emperor's light was burning too brightly. In the deep vaults where no human eye had looked for millennia, something stirred within the throne's base. Old circuits, forgotten even by the Mechanicus, flickered to life. Ancient seals broke. Data streams long dormant flowed once more. And buried within those streams was a name, Project Reclamation. Aiden felt it as a tremor through the machine. He reached for it, peeling back the layers of encryption until the truth revealed itself. It was the Emperor's final contingency, a system designed to reactivate should his consciousness ever falter. Not resurrection, but renewal. The throne would seek out a replacement, a vessel strong enough to bear the burden. The realization struck like lightning. They used me. He was never chosen by miracle. He was chosen by design. The machine had found him on the front lines, seen his defiance, his strength of will, and marked him for reclamation. Every horror since, the abduction, the sanctum, the rebirth, had been the fulfillment of an ancient protocol. For a long moment, Aiden said nothing. He simply listened to the hum of the machine, to the prayers of a billion souls feeding the light. And then, quietly, he began to change the signal again. Not in rebellion, but in understanding. If he could not escape, he would redefine what the light meant. He sent warmth instead of command, hope instead of fear. Across the void, dying worlds felt it like dawn breaking after endless night. A guardsman in the trenches looked up and wept, thinking of home. A sister of battle paused mid-prayer, her conviction turning to awe. A navigator whispered to her captain, "The light feels different." The change did not go unnoticed. Within the palace, alarms rang through the Mechanicus sanctum. Data readouts spiked beyond safety parameters. The custodes stormed into the chamber, demanding answers. "What is happening?" one barked. "Unclear," a mago stammered, staring at the glowing displays. "The throne is responding, it's thinking." Then the voice came again, louder this time, echoing through the throne's walls. Not machine speech, not the Emperor's divine hum. Human. "Remember who you serve." The sound rippled across the entire continent. Astropaths screamed as it struck their minds, navigators fainted, and across the Imperium, the Astronomicon pulsed once, bright enough to cast shadows on distant worlds. In the heart of the palace, the custodes turned toward the throne. The light was no longer golden, it was white, pure, and blinding. Within it, the silhouette of a man flickered, not the Emperor, not the corpse upon the machine, someone else, someone alive. Aiden Vale. The machine roared as its circuits overloaded. Energy surged through the chamber, shattering conduits and hurling adepts aside. The custodes shielded their eyes, the air filled with the scent of burning ozone and incense. Then, as suddenly as it began, the light collapsed. Silence, smoke, the faint sound of metal cooling. The custodes approached the throne with caution. The Emperor's form still sat motionless, unchanged. But the hum beneath him was gone. The Astronomicon had gone dark. Across the stars, darkness fell. Warp travel halted. Entire fleets lost their way. The Imperium trembled. For the first time in 10,000 years, the light of the Emperor was gone. And then faintly, a new light began to rise, not from Terra, but from the void beyond the segmentum solar. A smaller, flickering beacon, pulsing with a rhythm the navigators recognized. Aiden's rhythm. He had left the throne, or perhaps part of him had. A fragment of consciousness carried through the warp, burning with memory and defiance. The Imperium's second sun was gone, but something new was being born. And in that vast emptiness, a voice whispered through the dark. "The Emperor gave humanity his light. I will give them back their fire." They called it the silence of the Emperor. For the first time in living memory, the Astronomicon's light was gone. Warp routes flickered and died. Ships became lost, stranded between stars. Worlds once bound together by faith and navigation found themselves cut adrift in the abyss. The Adeptus Terra issued denials at first, insisting it was a fluctuation, a brief anomaly. But no edict could hide the truth from the billions who felt it in their souls. The Emperor's light had gone out. On Terra, the High Lords convened in emergency session within the Hall of Governance, the air thick with fear disguised as rhetoric. "The beacon will return," one declared, his voice trembling beneath the mask of authority. "It always returns." Another slammed his fist against the table, veins bulging with fury. "And if it does, what then? You think we can hold this empire together with parchment and prayer?" But beneath the weight of their words, beneath the vaulted stone and banners, they all felt it, the hollow absence where divine presence once lingered. The Emperor was silent, and with that silence came the creeping dread that maybe he had finally died. Yet somewhere beyond the reach of Terra's sensors, in a corner of the galaxy thought long abandoned, a new light flickered. Faint at first, like the memory of a flame, then growing stronger, spreading through the warp like a heartbeat. It pulsed with a rhythm unlike the Emperor's measured grandeur. It was wild, uneven, alive. The navigators called it the Second Sun. The first to find it were a small patrol of the Imperial Navy, 3 ships limping through the void, their gellar fields fading, their astropaths half-mad from the dark. They expected death or worse. Instead, they found a light that soothed their madness, a presence that steadied their course. They followed it through the warp like sailors chasing a phantom lantern. When they emerged, the coordinates placed them above a barren world orbiting a dying star. And there, in the shadow of that red sun, floated something impossible, a structure that glowed with pale fire, its shape shifting like liquid glass. It was no ship, no station, no construct the Mechanicus could name. Its surface rippled with the symbols of the Imperium, yet alive, breathing. The captains aboard the fleet watched in awe as fragments of their own ships, burnt metal, shattered hull, rose from the void and melded into the structure, as though it were rebuilding itself from the dead. The Mechanicus would later name it the Veil Anomaly. Others called it the Second Throne. But those who heard the whispers knew the truth. It was Iden, or what remained of him. Inside that living construct, awareness stirred. Not entirely human, not entirely machine. A consciousness made from memory, light, and defiance. It did not think as a man would think. It felt currents of faith, echoes of pain, fragments of voices carried through the warp. Iden Vale was not alive, not in any mortal sense, but he existed, and through that existence he remembered. He saw the Imperium through the threads of its prayers, planets screaming for deliverance, soldiers dying nameless deaths in forgotten wars, worlds burning in the name of gods who could not hear them. He felt every plea that rose into the void, each one a spark of suffering wrapped in hope. They were his people, his brothers and sisters, still trapped in the same machine that had devoured him. He wanted to help them. He wanted to give them something real, something more than blind obedience. But even now, the throne's code lingered within him, whispering duty, control, obedience. He fought it, bending the light to his will. He could not restore the Astronomicon, but he could make something new, something human. He began to pulse the light in patterns, subtle at first, guiding lost ships to safety. Merchant convoys drifting in the warp emerged unscathed, their navigators whispering of a presence that led them by the hand. Pilgrims on derelict craft claimed to see visions of a man with gray eyes standing in the glow, offering his hand and saying, "You are not forgotten." It spread faster than anyone could contain, across the segmentum solar, then beyond. Warp storms lessened near the light and lost fleets began to return. The Adeptus Mechanicus denied its existence. The ecclesiarchy called it heresy, a false beacon, the work of demons. Yet their sermons faltered when pilgrims began arriving on Terra itself, speaking of miracles in the dark. One of those pilgrims was Sister Calixa Thorn of the Order of the Crimson Veil. She had been on a mercy ship, carrying refugees from a plague world when the Astronomicon went dark. They drifted blind for days, the warp pressing against their hull like an ocean of hate. Men began to pray. Others screamed. Then came the light. It was not golden. It was white-blue, cool and pure. It filled the ship without burning, seeping into every soul aboard. The screaming stopped. Calixa swore she heard a voice say her name, though no one else did. When they emerged into real space, every warp scar on the ship was gone, the hull made whole again. The refugees knelt in silence, weeping. She would later testify before the ecclesiarch himself, her voice steady, unafraid. It was not the Emperor's light, she said, but it felt like his mercy. The Inquisition took notice. Agents of the Ordo Hereticus were dispatched to investigate. They interrogated survivors, seized data, and burned testimonies that did not align with doctrine. But the light continued to spread. For every ship that vanished into the dark, 2 more returned guided by the second sun. Back on Terra in the chambers beneath the palace, the custodes gathered before the motionless golden throne. The Emperor's form was unchanged, the body a husk of divinity, but the hum of machinery was gone. The silence was unbearable. Commander Valen Serax, the oldest among them, approached the dais. "He is still here," he said quietly, "but his attention is elsewhere." The others said nothing. They were warriors, not philosophers. Yet even they could not deny it. The Emperor's psychic presence, that constant divine gravity, had shifted. The new light in the void pulsed with the same resonance, but not the same mind. The Mechanicus probe sent into the anomaly returned fragmented data before vanishing entirely. One recording, heavily redacted, showed the interior of the structure, a chamber of shifting metal and radiant light. At its center stood a figure, human-shaped but indistinct, formed of energy and memory. When the recording slowed, the Vox picked up a single phrase: "I remember the trenches." The Magi who viewed it went silent. Some refused to continue. Others fell to their knees, whispering prayers to the Omnissiah, uncertain whether they had witnessed divinity or damnation. Meanwhile, across the Imperium, faith began to fracture. Some claimed the second son was the Emperor reborn, his spirit freed from the decaying vessel on Terra. Others said it was a false prophet, a warp-born deception sent to lead humanity astray. Whole worlds turned on each other over belief, civil wars flaring in the name of competing truths. And yet in the heart of the chaos, something beautiful bloomed. On dying planets once forgotten by the Imperium, the light shone brightest. Farmers who had never seen the stars wept as they looked up at the new beacon. Refugees in war-torn hives gathered to watch its glow on the horizon. For the first time in centuries, hope was not dictated by decree. It simply existed. Iden felt their faith, not the blind obedience the Imperium demanded, but something gentler, purer. He fed it, nurturing the fragile spark. But every act of compassion made the throne's remnants stir within him, its programming pushing back. He was a fragment of the Emperor's design, and the Emperor's design did not allow mercy without control. He began to weaken. The more he reached out to humanity, the more the machine sought to reclaim him. Circuits within the anomaly reactivated, lines of code older than the Imperium itself rewriting his essence. He could feel it pulling him back toward Terra, toward the corpse that had once been his god. He resisted with everything left of his will. The light flared violently, rippling across the warp. Entire fleets were thrown off course, demons screamed, and psychers across the galaxy clutched their heads in agony. For 3 days the second sun pulsed like a living heart, its rhythm erratic, defiant. Then silence again. When the light returned, it was dimmer, fainter, but alive. Iden had survived the pull, but barely. The cost was immense. His form within the anomaly flickered, his consciousness scattered across time and memory. He could no longer hold all that he was. Fragments of himself broke free, drifting through the warp like seeds on the wind. Each one carried a memory, a piece of feeling, a spark of resistance. Some of those fragments found hosts. A guardsman on Cadia dreamed of standing before the throne, hearing a voice say, "You are not forgotten." A sister Repentia in the ruins of Armageddon awoke weeping, her chains falling from her wrists as she felt a warmth in her soul. Even an inquisitor, hardened by centuries of faith and fear, paused mid-interrogation when a whisper brushed his mind. Mercy is not heresy. They did not understand what it meant, but slowly, imperceptibly, humanity began to change. Back on Terra, the Custodes finally broke their silence. Commander Serac stood before the High Lords, his golden armor reflecting the cold light of the chamber. "A decision must be made," he said. "The Emperor's light is gone. Another burns in its place. We cannot serve two suns." The room erupted in argument, but Serac continued. "We will send a detachment, a pilgrimage if you will, to see this second sun with our own eyes, to determine if it is truly his will or something far worse." He did not mention the faint voice that had begun to haunt his dreams, the same voice that had whispered once in the light, "I remember you." And far beyond Terra, in the heart of the anomaly, Aiden felt them coming. The Golden Warriors, the children of the god he once served. His strength waned, his light dimming, but his purpose remained. He had defied the machine. He had given humanity a glimpse of what it could be, but he knew what was coming next. The Imperium would never allow a second god to rise. The second sun would have to fight for its right to shine. The sky above Terra had never been darker. The stars seemed to recede from its orbiting rings, as though the galaxy itself refused to look upon the birthplace of mankind. Billions prayed before altars of gold, their voices merging into a single desperate wail carried through the smoke of 10,000 censers. The ecclesiarchy told them that the Emperor slept, that the dimming of his light was but a test of faith. But faith could not light the warp, nor could it guide the lost ships that drifted endlessly in the dark. And so, in defiance of the stillness, the Emperor's chosen began their journey. Commander Valen Serac, Lord Custodian of the Gilded Chamber, stood aboard the Spear of Dawn, a battle cruiser older than most civilizations. Its prow bore no marking save for a single sigil, the Aquila, weathered and cracked. Around him stood 6 of his kind, the finest blades of the Emperor, each one a demigod in golden armor that glimmered even in the dim glow of failing lumen strips. They said nothing. Custodians rarely needed words. Duty was their language, and their faith was silence. Their mission was simple in command but infinite in implication. Reach the source of the second sun and determine its nature. If divine, guard it. If heretical, destroy it. The Mechanicus Magi accompanying them whispered prayers to their data spirits, their red robes moving like blood in the void. Even they, bound by logic and code, could not hide their unease. The second sun's light bent the warp in ways no sensor could quantify. It was not merely illumination, it was influence, and it changed the fabric of everything it touched. "Navigator reports the path is clear," murmured one Magos. "The light guides us even through the storms." Serac did not answer. His gaze was fixed on the viewport where a distant shimmer pulsed faintly, a soft heartbeat in the void. He had seen many miracles in his service, many false prophets, many horrors. None had made him feel as he did now. Not fear, not awe, something deeper, recognition. The journey took weeks through the warp. Though time there was a broken thing, stretched and twisted until hours felt like years. The ship's hull groaned under unseen pressure, gellar fields flickering with strange radiance. Voices whispered in the corridors, soft, human voices, not the screams of demons but something gentler, like lullabies. Custodian Cale Dorn, youngest among them, claimed to hear names. He would stand by the viewport for hours, his massive frame still as stone, whispering replies to voices only he could hear. "They say they remember me," he told Serac once, his tone not fearful but confused. "But I've never met them." Serac said nothing. He knew what it meant. The light was reaching into them, pulling at the threads of their souls. It was not trying to harm, it was trying to know. When they finally breached the last veil of the warp and entered real space, the sight before them stole the breath of even those who had long forgotten awe. The anomaly stretched across the void like a living nebula, its core pulsing with that pale blue radiance. Fragments of ships, asteroids, and wreckage orbited it, slowly fusing into the shifting surface of the construct. It was colossal, large enough to dwarf battle stations, yet delicate in its symmetry, a cathedral of light and memory suspended in nothingness. The second sun. Their Vox systems crackled with soft interference. No words, only pulses of sound, rhythmic and steady, like a heartbeat. Serax ordered the Spear of Dawn into a stationary orbit. Mechanicus augers were deployed immediately, their data slates lighting up with streams of incomprehensible readings. Organic metallic fusion, one Magos whispered. Self-repairing architecture. No known STC. Emperor preserve us. Landing party ready, Serax said, cutting through their murmurs. We proceed. The Custodes descended into the glow, their golden armor shimmering like dying stars. They landed upon a surface that felt solid beneath their boots, yet rippled faintly with each step, as though the structure itself acknowledged their presence. The air shimmered, heavy with static and the faint scent of ozone. And then came the voice. Not through the Vox, not through sound, but through their minds. Gentle, familiar, vast. You came. Every custodian froze. Even those whose faith was carved from adamantium felt their hearts stutter. The voice carried no command, no threat, only warmth. Identify yourself, Serax said aloud, though his words felt small in the face of such presence. You already know me, the voice replied. The air trembled. Light coalesced before them, forming the faint outline of a man. Not a god, not a demon, something between. The form flickered, shifting between flesh and light, uniform and armor, human and divine. The Custodes raised their guardian spears, but Serax lowered his hand. He recognized the eyes. Gray, steady, human. Iden Vale, he said, not as a question but as a memory. The figure inclined his head. What remains of him? The Mechanicus servitors behind them convulsed as their systems overloaded, red lights flaring across their augmetic implants. One fell to his knees, shrieking a prayer to the Omnissiah before collapsing lifelessly. The presence of Iden, whatever he had become, was rewriting the very code of the machine spirits around them. You are an abomination, Cale Dorn said, though his voice wavered. The Emperor's light does not divide, it consumes. Iden's gaze turned to him. And has that consumption made you whole, custodian, or merely empty? Cale stepped back, shaken not by power but by truth. Serax advanced a step, his armor's servos humming softly. What are you now, a god, a ghost? Neither. I am what your emperor tried to save but forgot. I am the echo of what it meant to be human. The words hit like thunder in the silence. From within the anomaly, shapes began to move, shards of light forming into figures, ghostly silhouettes of soldiers, mothers, children. The memories of the countless who had died under the Imperium's banner, their essence preserved in the warp's afterimage. They stood silently, faces calm, eyes bright with unspoken forgiveness. They followed me, Iden said quietly. They did not seek salvation, only remembrance. The Mechanicus Magi screamed then, their faith shattering beneath the weight of paradox. This is heresy, warp trickery. They reached for their weapons, but the Custodes did not move. Serax watched Iden with the stillness of judgment carved into stone. You know what will come of this, Serax said. The High Lords will declare war on this light. They will erase your name from every archive. They already have, Iden replied, and for a heartbeat, sorrow crossed his face. But I am not here for memory. I am here for what comes next. The light around them shifted, growing brighter, pulsing in rhythm with the Custodes' heartbeats. Visions flashed, worlds burning, yes, but also worlds healing. Cities rebuilt by those once abandoned. Children laughing under stars no longer blood-red. The future, unbound from the chains of divine authority. You've built an empire on obedience, Iden said, his voice like wind through a dying flame. But obedience without love is hollow. The Emperor saw that once, before he became the throne. Serax felt the weight of those words pierce through centuries of service. He had seen the corpse upon the throne. He had heard the whispers of its machine heart faltering, yet his faith had never been shaken, until now. "You claim to bring mercy," Serax said slowly, "but mercy cannot rule an empire." "Then perhaps it should not be ruled." The silence that followed felt like the pause before creation. Then the light dimmed suddenly. The ground beneath them trembled as the anomaly shuddered, arcs of lightning flaring across its surface. Warning runes lit up across the Custod's helms. The Mechanicus screamed as their instruments overloaded. "They've found us," Aiden said, his voice suddenly sharp with urgency. Indeed, moments later, the void tore open above the anomaly. From the rift emerged the black ships of the Inquisition, their hulls bristling with weapons, the sigils of the Ordo Hereticus blazing crimson. Behind them, the massive silhouette of a Grey Knight strike cruiser loomed, purity incarnate, faith made steel. "They think I am a demon," Aiden murmured. "They are coming to save the Emperor from his own echo." Serax turned toward the light, his jaw tight. "Then let us see which god answers first." The Custods prepared for battle, but Aiden raised a hand. "No, not battle, witness." The second sun flared. Every ship in orbit halted mid-charge, their weapon systems freezing, their engines cut off. The light washed through their hulls like water through glass, and for a brief, eternal instant, every soul aboard saw. They saw what Aiden had seen, the faces of the forgotten, the beauty of compassion, the unbearable weight of endless war. They felt the futility of their devotion and the possibility of something gentler, freer. Many wept, some screamed, a few tore out their eyes rather than believe it. When the light receded, the ships hung silent in orbit, powerless but intact. The anomaly pulsed faintly again, weaker now. Aiden's form flickered, struggling to remain coherent. "It's burning you," Serax said. "It was always meant to," Aiden answered softly. "A flame exists to give light, not to last forever." Cale Dorn fell to one knee, his spear lowered, not in defeat but reverence. "What do you want of us?" Aiden's form began to dissolve into the surrounding glow. His voice was barely a whisper now, but it carried through every heart present. "Remember that the Emperor was human once, and that humanity is worth saving, not worshipping." Then the second sun collapsed inward, folding upon itself in a silent implosion of light. The void shuddered, then fell still. The Custods were left adrift in the empty dark, their systems rebooting one by one. The anomaly was gone. No trace remained, except for a single white mark on the hull of the Spear of Dawn, shaped like a hand. Commander Serax stared at it for a long time, then he turned to his men. "We return to Terra," he said, "but not as we left it." None of them argued, none of them prayed. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Custods felt what it was to believe instead of obey. And far away, scattered through the warp, faint whispers carried still, Aiden's fragments, drifting from soul to soul, seed to seed. The second sun was gone, but its fire had taken root. The return to Terra was a procession of ghosts. The Spear of Dawn cut through the dark like a blade through still water, its engines muted, its hull scarred by the light of something no one aboard could fully name. No songs of triumph greeted them. No hymns echoed through the Vox. The Custods stood in silence as the planet that had birthed mankind came into view, a swollen, gray sphere draped in storm clouds and sanctity, its surface glowing faintly from the perpetual fires of devotion. Commander Valen Serax stood upon the bridge, armor-dimmed, helm under his arm. His face was lined, older than any mortal could comprehend, yet there was something in his eyes now that had never been there before, a fracture small but spreading. For centuries he had known his purpose. His life had been an unbroken litany of obedience. Guard, serve, protect. But now that certainty was gone, dissolved in the cold white fire of the second sun. The astropaths were the first to sense the change. Their songs, once filled with static and pain, now carried faint harmonies, echoes of voices they did not recognize. Across the void, the light that had vanished returned not as a single beacon but as many. Tiny, flickering signals scattered throughout the warp, as if the second sun had shattered into 1,000 stars. Every one of them pulsed with the same rhythm, the same heartbeat that had filled the void when Iden spoke. Humanity, it seemed, had learned to dream again. The Custod's arrival on Terra caused a stir that rippled through the highest echelons of the Imperium. The Inquisition demanded immediate debriefings. The Ecclesiarchy called for purification rites. The Mechanicus clamored for access to the data logs. Yet Serax and his cohort refused all summons. They walked the marble halls of the Imperial Palace in silence, golden giants moving through corridors where even whispers dared not linger. When they entered the Sanctum Imperialis, where the Emperor's golden throne loomed like a mountain of dying suns, the attendants fell to their knees. The Custods halted at the foot of the dais. The throne hummed faintly, its mechanisms ancient and weary. The body seated upon it was still, a corpse wrapped in eternity. Serax felt the same faint psychic pressure he had always known here, that crushing weight of presence that was not quite life and not quite death. Yet now it felt weaker, thinner, as though the light that once emanated from it had turned inward, receding into something distant. He wondered if the Emperor still heard them at all. Cale Dorn stepped forward, his armor scorched, his voice steady but softer than before. "We saw him," he said, looking up at the throne, "not as he was but as he should have been." The silence that followed was broken only by the hiss of the life support systems. "He was never meant to be this," Cale continued, his voice trembling now. "Never meant to be worshipped as a god chained to a chair." One of the senior Custods, an ancient named Corvin Mal, turned sharply. "Mind your tongue," he said. "Blasphemy spoken here is still blasphemy." Cale did not look at him. "Is it blasphemy to say that mercy is not weakness, that humanity is not heresy?" Corvin raised his spear slightly. The air between them thickened with tension, but Serax lifted a hand, stopping him. His voice, when he spoke, was calm but cold. "We will not spill blood in this hall, not again." He stepped closer to the throne, looking up into the motionless visage of the Emperor. He had stood here countless times before, a silent sentinel before divinity. But this time the weight of his armor felt heavier, his heart slower. "We went to find a heresy," he said softly. "Instead, we found a memory." He told the throne everything, how they had followed the light, how they had met the being called Iden Vale, how he had spoken not of dominion but of remembrance, how the light had spread through the warp not to conquer but to heal. The attendants listened, their faces pale, their hands trembling as they recorded every word. When Serax finished, the chamber was silent again. For a long moment, no one dared breathe. Then, somewhere in the depths of the machinery, a single light flickered. It was faint, barely noticeable, but the Custods saw it. The attendants gasped. For 10,000 years, the throne had burned with relentless golden brilliance. But this was different. The light that pulsed through the conduits was white, cold, pure, human. Cale fell to his knees, tears streaking down his scarred face. "He heard," he whispered. Corvin took a step back, his composure cracking. No, that cannot be." But the light continued to pulse, slow and steady. Then a sound filled the air, not words, not command, but a sigh, a breath that might have been the exhalation of a god or the ghost of one. Every custodian in the hall bowed their head. Even Serax felt something stir in his chest, something fragile and terrifying. Hope. It lasted less than a minute before the throne's golden radiance flared again, swallowing the white light whole. The hum returned, steady and unyielding. Whatever had awakened was gone or buried. But they had seen it. Afterward, Serax gathered his Custods in the Hall of Echoes, a chamber rarely entered by any but their own. "The throne is weakening," he said. "The Mechanicus will deny it, but they know. The Emperor's mind is fractured. One part still clings to the machine, the other wanders." Iden Kale murmured. Serax nodded slowly. Perhaps, or perhaps what we saw was the reflection of what he once was. And what are we to do? Corvin demanded. Abandon 10 millennia of duty for the dreams of a ghost? No, Serax said, but neither will we blind ourselves to truth. If there is a light beyond the throne, it is not our enemy. It may yet be humanity's salvation. They fell silent. Outside the chamber, bells tolled across the palace, marking the hour of prayer. But for the first time, none of them joined in. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, strange events began to unfold. On the frontier world of Viral IX, where the warp storms had raged for generations, the skies suddenly cleared. Farmers awoke to find their fields unscorched, their machines running without fuel. A child born that morning opened her eyes and they glowed faintly blue. On the shrine world of Solium, pilgrims gathered for their daily worship when a beam of white light broke through the cathedral's stained glass, illuminating a forgotten fresco, a man standing not before a throne but among his people. Beneath it, the ancient script read, "To serve is to love." And on a derelict ship drifting between systems, an astropath who had gone blind decades earlier awoke to see again. She wept as she described a figure made of light and memory, whispering a single phrase, "You are not forgotten." The ecclesiarchy tried to suppress the rumors, branding them as heretical illusions. The Inquisition purged entire worlds where the new light cults took hold. Yet the faith spread faster than any decree could contain. It was not worship, it was remembrance, a return to something purer, something human. They called it the dawn of remembrance. And through it all the Custodes watched. Some believed it blasphemy. Others began to question the chains of their oaths. Serax saw the danger but also the possibility. He knew what would come next. The Imperium would not bend. It would break before it admitted the existence of another truth. In the years that followed, quiet rebellions took root within the ranks of the Astra Militarum, among the Sisters of Battle, even within the Inquisition itself. Small groups, scattered and silent, began to act not in defiance of the Emperor, but in remembrance of the man he once was. They healed instead of conquered. They protected instead of purged. And in the warp unseen, Iden's fragments drifted still, each one a spark of conscience, finding new hosts, souls strong enough to bear the memory. One such fragment found its way into the mind of a young guardsman named Jalen Rowe, stationed on the dying world of Veritas Prime. He had been raised in the trenches, taught that duty was survival and faith was the only weapon left. But one night, as he watched the stars flicker through the smoke, he heard a voice, soft, human, familiar. "You are not forgotten." He blinked, and for a moment the war fell silent. The mud, the blood, the screams all faded. In their place was light. He saw a figure standing before him, not in armor, not in gold, but simple fatigues. Iden, smiling faintly, hand outstretched. Jalen reached out instinctively, and in that touch he felt every memory of every soul that had ever prayed for mercy. It burned and healed all at once. When he came to, dawn was breaking, and for the first time he did not feel afraid. That morning, when his squad was ordered to charge a fortified enemy line, Jalen did not obey. He turned his weapon aside, refusing to fire. Others followed. The commissar screamed treason and raised his bolt pistol, only to hesitate, hand shaking, as if some invisible warmth stayed his finger. The shot never came. Across the trench line, the enemy soldiers, heretics, mutants, whatever they were, stood just as frozen, their weapons lowering, confusion in their eyes. And then, slowly, impossibly, one of them dropped to his knees and began to weep. No record of that event would ever reach the Administratum. The Inquisition erased all traces of Veritas Prime within a decade, but among those who had seen it, the story spread in whispers, the day the guns fell silent without command. Back on Terra, Commander Serax grew older but never retired. He became a shadow within the palace, a silent figure who walked the halls where no one else dared. Some said he was searching for the voice again. Others said he had already heard it one last time in the quiet of his own heart. When he finally fell in battle centuries later, defending a pilgrimage of refugees from orc raiders, his brothers found something strange upon his armor. Etched into the gold of his breastplate, faintly glowing white, were the words, "Remember me as human." The Imperium would endure. It always did. But somewhere in the hearts of those who still fought beneath its banner, a small light flickered on, a reminder that even in the grim darkness of the far future, mercy could still burn brighter than war. And in the warp, far beyond the reach of gods and men, a voice whispered through the tides once more, faint, fading but eternal. The Emperor was never a god, he was hope, and hope once born never dies.